Thank you so much, Mike, for agreeing to be here today. I am so excited to have you. For anyone who doesn't know, Mike and I were colleagues at Granger Canada not too long ago. Well, I mean, it feels like a million years ago now, doesn't it, Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does. So many changes.
Yeah, tons. So you and I reconnected on LinkedIn over the last year or so, and that's been great. And you are definitely not someone I would ever ghost. And when I saw you start to write on, about ghosting and putting up all your amazing videos. So anyone who isn't connected with Mike on LinkedIn should definitely get connected with him because he has all these fantastic videos and your sales videos, which I love. And as I understand it, you're starting a YouTube channel. Is that right?
100%. 100%. Yes.
Yeah. After the session. And this session will be one of the things that you put up.
My action items. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for joining. What's going to happen next is Mike will put up his slides. So you can go ahead and share your screen, Mike. And then we'll get going and you guys can ask your questions in the chat. But for me, I'm going to disappear and leave it up to you, Mike.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So welcome, everybody. I appreciate this opportunity to talk. I think this ghosting is a phenomenon that's hitting across all segments of our lives. And I found it particularly challenging when I entered into job search mode. So I think a lot of us who've been in that search mode have had this happen. And so my journey is, today I'm going to talk to you about this practice. I'm going to talk to you about the effects that it has on us and why we need to normalize not ghosting and maybe even holding people who ghost accountable. With my journey, I ended up developing practices and techniques and tactics and mindset that when I came into 2021, I never got ghosted again. And I'm happy to share those with you as well. Amy is offering double your money back on anything you would have paid to get into the seminar. If you use these tactics and still get ghosted, she will remit you twice what you paid for your registration fee for the seminar, which I think is very generous. And with that, we'll get right in. On my pause, I think that's it.
Just do this one, and
this one?
Definitely done.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah. No sweat. So how would we define ghosting? Ghosting is a unilateral end to a process or a relationship without informing the other party that this action has taken place. The decision maker in this instance pretends to be a ghost. Oh no, I'm a ghost. I can't communicate with you now that I'm in the spirit world because we never hear from them again. According to a LinkedIn study recently, 93% of respondents indicated that they had been ghosted by an employer. So I actually feel like this is getting worse. And I think it's also important to understand what ghosting is not. Ghosting is not sending an application with no response. So if you send a resume out, you don't hear back. I don't feel that's ghosting. And I would only define ghosting in situations where you had meaningful dialogue. My rule of thumb would be, one or more interviews, if not two or more, because you're going to have introductory calls in your sales process or with your employment process that just don't go anywhere. It's not the same thing. Ghosting is when we know what's going on with ghosting. We've invested time, things have happened. And for some reason, they've exited the 3D world and entered the spirit world when it comes to communicating with you. Ghosting is actually more costly than people realize. And this is based on our human nature. It's captured by a phenomenon known as the Zeigarnik effect. Psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik theorized and proved that so much mental effort is required when your tasks are interrupted or in the process of being completed. These types of open loops are very cognitively demanding. Our poor subconscious does not know how to handle unclosed loops, and it will haunt you until we get closure. This is why we wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning. Did I forget to send the quote? Did I forget to return the email? Our subconscious will haunt us like a ghost without definitive closure. It's another reason why we struggle with to be continued, because again, our subconscious cannot handle unclosed loops. We need finality. We need things to process normally. So this is even more reason why this action needs to stop, because it is clearly more costly than we maybe recognize, as bad as it feels already. So why do people engaged in hiring choose to ghost candidates. So according to a survey, a 2020 survey of recruiters, HR, and hiring managers, the top 3 reasons for ghosting a candidate are, first, the vast majority, 58%, there was an unwillingness on the part of the hiring manager or recruiter to have a difficult conversation. And I think that this is at the heart of most of the ghosting in terms of relationship or processes outside of work where ghosting takes place, because people are a lot of times uncomfortable with having a difficult conversation. So that you might hear something like, hey, it's easier this way. I just hate having to give bad news. The second most prevalent reason was lack of time management skills, 29%. This might be reflected in, oh, I'm too busy to call everybody back. If I had to call everybody back, I'd never have time. So you hear it, and I don't really feel that. I don't feel that. I've always considered busy to be kind of a noisy word because it's so subjective. I think it does come down to time management. So this is really captured in, I understand there's a workload associated with closing out processes, but it's the right type of work, right? And then finally, a lot of folks have become, especially during 2020, when there was maybe more job seekers given the disruption, and people in certain industries, like in the recruiting industries, where you make your living off of people. So there's a tendency sometimes where professionals become desensitized to seeing people as people and seeing people potentially as, I heard things like commodities, or I heard a recruiter say, hey, you have to understand the inventory, you're part of the inventory, and I didn't really self-select as inventory. When they say, hey, look at this stack of resumes, look at this big stack of resumes, I'm thinking, well, that's a big stack. That's actually people, right? Those aren't resumes, those are people, right? So I think that desensitization that can come with it and can lead to ghosting, right? Because they're not giving people the proper respect in a process. I really think that the activity is really demeaning to everybody. I think it's ridiculous that 2 people would ever spend meaningful time in a process only to use not talking to each other as the outcome algorithm. I mean, we're not in junior high anymore. I think we need to normalize not ghosting as a practice, and maybe we need to normalize holding people accountable and holding organizations accountable for the practice of ghosting. And we'll have more on that later.
Mike, I wanted
Yes.
to jump in because this is something I've been thinking a lot about leading up to this session. And, you talk about why people ghost. So one thing that I would kind of challenge our audience to think about today is, have you ever ghosted, and why did you ghost? Because sometimes we practice behaviors that we may not realize at the time that we don't like, right? So, and I mean, you might go into this when you're talking about, how we never get ghosted again, but yeah. I've thought a lot about it, and I can talk about it later, not now. Yeah. But maybe I feel like sometimes I've ghosted people, and I was trying to understand why I would do that. And I've come up with a few things that I can talk about a little later, but I would challenge everyone to consider that. Yeah, you know what? I mean, I think that I thought about a lot. I thought about this a lot too, right? Because I felt like, do I have a right to have a moral gravitas? If I get ghosted. But I remember, I'm actually really grateful. I'm incredibly grateful that where I learned hiring at the organization I was, and I'll call it out, it was Centos. That's where I learned how to hire. The number one rule in the hiring practice was maintain the candidate's self-esteem. So that was the overriding principle above all else, above fit, above anything. It was maintain the candidate's self-esteem, right? So ghosting, for me, at least in the hiring process, was it was a no-fly zone for me, and that was really just based on kind of how I was raised, right? Because ghosting is the opposite of maintaining a candidate's self-esteem. And I love that. I absolutely love that, maintaining the candidate's self-esteem. I wish think about what a better place the world would be if every hiring manager had that on their mind. That's excellent. Yeah, thank you. All right, no, I loved it too, and I'm grateful that I learned it. So my personal ghost story, the one that kind of stuck out and maybe set me on this path, it definitely got me to write the article. But early in 2020, so when I entered into job search mode, I had applied in really kind of out of the gate. These things happen, and you're blown up, and you're shell-shocked, right? And then you start to put your feet back in the water. And so one of the earliest applications processes that I undertook, I had applied with a national brand on a job posting. And coincidentally, I had actually worked with the company president
of this national brand at a prior role. And so when they contacted me immediately, I thought, well, maybe this has something to do with the fact that, that I know this guy, and I took it as a really good sign. And they kind of ran me through the interview process, from screening to direct manager to full board review, and all within really 96 hours. I think I had like 2 interviews within the first 48 hours of applying, and then they set me up, early the following week for 3 to 4 senior level executive interviews over a 2-day span. And so this process was fast. And I put a lot in. I probably put 12 hours in terms of prep and interview time, and then post-interview I sent all the follow-ups, and then I got ghosted. Right. So the outcome and that process was to be ghosted. But wait, there's more. There's more to this story. There's more. I'm definitely 5 weeks after the line went cold, I was still feeling bad about the outcome. Right. As a person, I tend to focus very intentionally on where I put my energy in, and I was determined to move past it. So I kept telling myself, oh, but you know what, when you get your role, it'll be fine, and things will work out, and things will catch up. But I was still feeling lousy about it. My subconscious wouldn't leave me alone. And then one day I was on LinkedIn, and I read a post on LinkedIn. And it was from a man who, when he was 12 years old, he sent a letter to Lego. He sent a Lego to Lego corporate, and he asked them about job opportunities. I think this was somewhere back in the 90s. And the team at Lego, they sent him back a personalized letter. They thanked him for his interest. They explained how the structure at Lego worked, how design was done in Europe and manufacturing and distribution was done in the US, and how he could ready himself for a career with Lego, what school he might take. And I was so struck. I was really struck. I was struck by the disparity between how Lego treated an adolescent with an unsolicited employment inquiry with such care and attention, and how beautiful that was. And kind of contrasting that with which kind of how I was treated by this national brand who jammed me into 5 interviews and ghosted me. So I tagged the president of the company along with his executive team in a comment on the post with no additional context. And so within 30 minutes, I heard directly back from the president through LinkedIn messaging. He asked me about the context, and I explained how I was struck by this gap, how I saw an opportunity for him and his team to be better. And he wasn't that happy about it. So he came back at me with a perspective of, oh, this is not how you communicate. And if you had done this, or if you had reached out, then this other thing would have happened. And I was able to explain to him that that's actually not how it works in the universe. The universe doesn't work like that. Nobody gets to use, if you had done this, I would have done that, in terms of doing the right thing. I thought it was odd because he's a lawyer, and that he would have already known that. But I literally, and in my heart, my feedback was intended to highlight a cultural opportunity. I suggested, hey, if you want to talk about this further, we can get on the phone. If you have additional concerns, I'm happy to talk to you. And then we left it at that. So I feel like it's that accountability factor, right? Like I really did feel that there was an opportunity. I don't know what led them to this practice, and I don't know how it could be that 5 professionals would all come to the same outcome. I'm not exactly sure what happened. Maybe it was the case that they were still, they thought I was the guy or something in the interview. But again, it was a process that I invested in. I didn't feel good about the fact that I was ghosted, and I wanted to have a conversation and accountability, because at the end of the day, like that would be the brand of Lego, right? So when I read that article about Lego, it's like, this is Lego, this is who they are, this is how they treat people, this is their brand. And then with the other company, it's that's also their brand, right? So there needs to be an awareness, I think, within organizations that when candidates that are unsuccessful, when they leave, they are leaving with very strong impressions of your organization, and that is your brand. And so you need to take that seriously, because that brand can be called out, especially these days.
Okay, a couple questions for you on that. Just because I feel like that story is so relatable. I can relate to it. I'm sure a lot of people on this call can relate to it, where you invest all that time and energy And after multiple conversations, you hear nothing back. You even know people in the business and you still hear nothing back. And I hear this story, Mike, time and again. So, a couple questions for you. When you I would say LinkedIn is kind of publicly calling people out, right?
Yep.
So when you tagged them on LinkedIn, did you overtly tag or did you covertly tag? So sometimes we can all see the people we've tagged. I know there's ways to do it where only they know they've been tagged.
Yeah. Well, I think over and without the additional context, it just at this person, at this person, at this person. Yeah.
Totally get it. So it's not like you were necessarily calling them out. That's you were calling them.
I'm drawing their attention to this article. They can learn a lesson from.
And so that's good. But what my question is now, do you feel like ultimately you have an ongoing relationship with those individuals, or do you feel like you kind of turned, like, that chapter's done?
I think that chapter's done.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I think that's okay. Full transparency. I wasn't even sure if I wanted the role, right? Because it was so fast. You know what I mean? Like I didn't even have a chance. Like if you take me in a process where I go from screening interview to executive team interview within 96 hours, I don't even have enough time to adjust to, whether it's the right fit for me. It's the right fit for me culturally. Yeah. Right. But I think the evidence point for me as I guess a consumer, or that I get my choices, I probably wouldn't work with that brand again. And
it's funny because Karen made a comment in thanks, Karen, that you weren't a good cultural fit for the organization and they did a favor by ghosting you, which, you know what, Karen is right. You weren't, especially considering how you started this conversation by maintaining self-esteem and how much you love that outlook. But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily take that sting away when we need a job and this happens, even though we know it was wrong. And like, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this in their personal life too, if they're dating somebody and they get ghosted, which is brutal. Yeah. Yes, that's a clear sign that person wasn't the right person for you ultimately, but it doesn't take the sting out when it happens, right? Yeah. Well, and job seekers are vulnerable, right? Like we're talking, unemployed job seekers are vulnerable, right? Yes. There's a vulnerability. So you're not even taking that into consideration, which is crazy, right? Yeah. Sometimes I hear from recruiters, they're mad about being ghosted. I'm thinking, who would ghost recruiters? Oh, that's when the recruiters are chasing people. That's when recruiters are chasing high profile stars at big organizations. And then those guys are, so there's that balance in play. Maybe there's a power dynamic, right? Yeah. But again, I can't change the world, right? So these practices happen. This organization, this is their culture, their practice, right? That's who they are, like, because that's their executive team. That's the character of the whole organization. So it's not a fit for me at all, right? But I can't, and I don't like it. But what can I do? I can't control the actions of it, but I can control my actions. I control my attitudes, my behaviors. So that's what led me to what's next. Okay, thank you. If anybody else has any questions, pop them in the chat and I will interrupt. I'm good at interrupting. I mean, it felt a little bold. It did feel, I'm not going to lie, like it was a little bit covert in the sense of like, but also too, and I questioned myself on that, but I don't know. I guess at that point, I just felt like making a bold statement. So, and it was bold. I admire it. It was bold. I don't know if I would have been able to do it. I don't know if you guys on the call would have been able to do it. Like it's a tough thing to do. Yes, it was brave and it was bold. And it worked. 30 minutes later, I got a call. 30 minutes. It turns out they weren't in the spirit world after all. They jump back into the three-dimensional world. And who knows what changed after that conversation? And maybe it was positive. I did intend it to be positive. I make mistakes too. I'm not perfect, right? And I would also want, an opportunity to be better, right? And to learn something. And that's part of my journey as well. But my next step. So I joined the Ghostbusters. I vowed from that day forward, I would join the Ghostbusters in their quest to bust ghosting forever. So I'm going to pause here because there have to be questions about this photo. But the questions about this photo. So when was it taken? You're not wearing a mask, so. Well, it was my first day. Oh, okay. And if anybody can name what I'm about to pull the lever on, if anybody can name that, then you're more of a nerd than I am. Oh, so, I can't.
Wait, I'm Wayne Tebby. I'm looking at you. I'm looking at you, Wayne Tebby. But if anybody else, anyways, I thought
Oh
it was
wait,
just
we've
funny.
got someone said disconnect. Someone said containment.
Yes, it's an ectoplasmic containment unit. That's where you put the ghosts.
Well done.
But yeah, no, that was a Comic Expo in Calgary. So of all the people who could give this talk, I actually have source material of me with the Ghostbusters, right? So that felt congruent. So here's my 3-step plan. Here's my 3-step plan to end ghosting. So step number 1 is around your mental frame. Step number 1 is to take ownership of the process. I actually used to do this a lot when I was in business development, particularly at Granger, actually is where I really learned it and applied it. Like, we need an outcome, right? So we need to have a mindset going in that I will own this process, and I will drive this process to an outcome. And that outcome doesn't necessarily have to be a yes, but that we are driving this process to an outcome, and that I'm not going to give control of the process to the other party. And I think this is where a lot of us struggle, especially when we're job seeker, particularly if we've been, laid off and, entering this world for the first time is, oh, what is the process? What's the next step? And I get it that functionally, the organization that you're working with and the hiring professionals that you're working with, they have a process and you're going to work with that process. But I shifted my mental. It's like, no, I own this process because I'm not going to give control to them. So I will always be, have ownership that I need a result, and I'm going to take ownership on getting that result, and I'm not going to give ownership of that result to somebody else. And I think that's a shift. Maybes in sales or hiring processes will rupture you. They will rupture you. I've seen this happen to sellers. I've seen this happen to job seekers. They sap your focus and your energy towards what you need to be doing because they represent, in a lot of instances, false hope, right? False hope will cause you to take your foot off the gas and confuse your mental clarity. You need the clear head of knowing precisely where you stand in an interview or a sales process, and taking ownership of that is one of the best ways. So many people I talked to felt like they were close, or when they got to second or third level interview, they didn't send out any applications that week. It's just, you got to know where you stand, and you've got to be really real and honest with yourself about that. So take ownership of the process is step 1. Step 2 is to leverage
Mike, sorry, I just want to
Yes.
interrupt for 1 second. And I think you've raised such an important, in fact, I know you raised such an important point, because one of the reasons we get ghosted is because we might have lost track of the process. So if you've applied to, 50 different jobs, it's like you do sales, I do a bit of sales. You have to manage that CRM, right? You have to manage your leads. And if you don't manage them, they may very well disappear. And you might feel ghosted and rejected, but really you didn't take control of that process. And I also absolutely love the point about you're driving for a result, not necessarily a yes. Because we can make people feel uncomfortable if we're driving for that yes, rather than have you made a decision instead of, have I got the job, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because I was, and as an anecdote, so I would get together with Michelle Green and Victor Sanchez as part of my inner networking group when I was in job seeking mode, and we would always get together every week or every 2 weeks, and we would talk about, hey, here's how many places that I applied, here's who I talked to, here's where I'm at in all these stages. And then, usually the update would start with, well, here's the processes that I'm still actively engaged in. So I interviewed with Drone Delivery Canada, right? So Drone Delivery Canada, very state of the art. I thought it was a great opportunity. Paula Fernandez was the HR manager. She was lovely. She was terrific to work with. First interview, I thought it went really well. Felt like we were connected, and I felt like I could add value to the organization. They were in Toronto though, right? And so one of the concerns that they have is, Mike, you're in Red Deer, we're in Toronto. I don't know if we want to make, the commitment financially, relocation, that sort of thing. And I was just about to go. I was like 10 minutes in advance of a meeting I was going to go to with Victor and Michelle. And I was going to say things like, oh, well, I'm, still in the interview process with Drone Delivery, but it had been a week and I hadn't heard, and it was feeling a little bit, And I thought, like, it was more important to me to just drive that outcome so that I could speak to Victor and Michelle with clarity. So I just sent a note to Paula, and I said, hey, from our time last week, I think I'm a great fit for organization. I think I can add value. At the same time, you had concerns around viability of where I live and the relocation. If that is too much of a concern, for you in the organization, I will take that feedback. And within 3 minutes, she came back. She said, Mike, you're a great candidate, but you're right. This is a barrier for us. We're driving in a different direction where we're looking at candidates that are closer to Toronto right now, but thank you. And I've even and I appreciate that. I've even shared notes with their CEO later. So that one to me, Amy, that's open, right? Because it was handled so well. I thought they did a great job in the process. And it was much better to me to go into my meeting with Victor and Michelle and say, I'm out on drone delivery. So, but where am I still in and what's the next one? Then it would be for me to say, oh, maybe they'll call me back. Maybe, because I need to drive my process because I need to know where I stand.
And our brains don't like uncertainty. So it's actually, you've given yourself some mental health help. And that's one thing that I hope people take away from this discussion today if they're on the job search, because, that taking control of your own outcome will really highly improve your well-being, and having answers will improve your well-being, even if they're not the answers you want to hear. Right. And I can say with total transparency that I have been there before, and I know that even a negative is better than nothing.
Yep. And speaking of mental, right? Because my next slide. So we got our brains, right? I don't think we realize how smart our emotions are, right? So this was a technique I picked up from somebody else. I think it was on a networking call. And it was literally, when you are at the point in your process where you're feeling emotionally uncomfortable, they should have called me, something's gone wrong. That is your cue to reach out one more time. That is your cue to reach out immediately one more time. A lot of us, myself included, we would get that feeling and we would rationalize, something's gone wrong. I should have heard. But we either are too afraid to reach out to get maybe the bad news, or we tell ourselves these crazy stories like, I'll just wait. It's better. I don't want to bug them, right? Like, anybody ever puts credits in a bank in a hiring process of like, oh, this person contacted me twice post-interview. Wow, how annoying. But this person didn't contact me at all. So I'm going to give them 22 extra credit points, and that will actually tip the balance in their favor when I hire them. It doesn't work like that. There's nothing wrong with polite persistence, right? Polite persistence is acceptable in every instance. And there's a reality that people think we think our rational brain is smart and their emotions need to be mitigated to make good choices, but that's totally wrong. Our rational brain is actually the dumbest intelligence we have. It's an absolute moron compared to the genius of our instinctive body intelligence and our subconscious. So this is often captured by our feelings in our gut, in our heart, right? So there's your cue. Your genius body is telling you something's gone wrong. So listen to it. That is your cue. Reach out one more time, or one additional time. And all you need to say, this is all I would do in this instance, is I would say, hello, hiring manager, what a lovely week we've had. Can you update me on next steps in the process? Can you update me on next steps in the process? Now, there's an NLP, if anybody's ever heard about neuro-linguistic programming, there's an NLP wisdom in the expression, can you? Because it's intended to elicit a yes response in the mind of the reader, because they actually do have the capacity to communicate with you. Whether they will or not is the question, but that first yes, and then, well, can I? Yes, I can, right? Even if it's no news, I can update. And that first yes is usually enough to stimulate an action to follow. And for me, in most instances, this was enough, right? So this is enough to get a response back, keep the ball in the air. I want to caution everybody to remove permission-based language really from all your communication. There's a lot of talk right now around how permission-based language, like I'm just following out, like just get rid of that. Just be direct. It kind of weakens your stance and your position and your brand to use permission-based language. It's okay to be really, really pleasant and soft and polite and nice and friendly up front. That in fact, you should do that. But just remove that permission-based language. And the last thing I want to make on this point is I thought it was really interesting. After I wrote this, I read an article from a contracting professional, because I'm actually having trouble getting paid on an invoice from some contracting work that I had done. And they said that in virtually every instance where they had a problem on collecting on an invoice, there was an emotional trigger that surfaced in the first meeting with the customers. So listen to your emotions. Your emotions are smart.
That's so true. And there's a whole book written called The Gift of Fear that is all about listening to your gut. I don't know if you've ever listened or read that book. If you haven't, it's such an excellent read. And one thing he says is your gut was put there, like your gut feeling was put there for a reason. So listen to it. So I'm just going to jump in for a minute because we've got a few things coming out on the chat that I wanted to mention. But I'd also really like your, there's another reason to remove permission-based language, like just or following up. And the reason is because, another reason is because cognitively speaking, we're used to seeing that and then seeing like a bit of a sales pitch or something. It's like something, it's language everyone uses. Like, hope you're having a good week. Or hope you and your, those are not bad things to say because they're not the right things to say to somebody in the sense that, you know, they're going to get upset about it, but they're going to see that from every other person. So how can you start your message in a way that's a little more attention grabbing and taking all the rest of the advice? And I love your advice on, can you update me on next steps in the process? That's
where you're at. That's it.
So we have a few questions here. I'm just going to kind of flip back to the chat because it was coming up. But there was a question about speaking more about taking control of the process and messaging. And if you or I could speak a little more about that. This person has followed up by phone and email. So Julie, thanks for the question. You followed up by phone and email, no response. So that is tough. And they've done the pleasantries that you've talked about in the process, and like what are the next steps, and still being ghosted.
That's hard. So one of the things in sales that we would do, so that's very hard. And one of the things we would do in sales is we would always mix up our mediums, right? So we would say, because sales is a little bit different. Like I'm chasing buyers and they may or may not, you know what I mean? It's not like they invited me for an interview and a different scenario. So I'm purely unsolicited as a sales in many instances, right? But you're doing the right thing by changing up the medium. So you go phone, you go email, and then you go LinkedIn, right? And so there's at least three. So text is also underrated. So text, I don't think people are using text enough, and that's something I saw in 2020. I did have the fortune to work with for a short time with a sales training organization, and then I also saw it as on the other side of it. So Sandler training, sales training. I was a prospect for them I looked at them the year before. So they started reaching out to me again in 2021. They sent me a LinkedIn message and I didn't respond. I wasn't interested, right? It was unsolicited. They sent me an email and I wanted to get back to them. I totally did. When he sent me the text, he sent me a text. He goes, it's John from Sandler. Sandler, hey, my email and phone, email can be so unreliable these days, but what I'm connecting with you because this, can we talk about this further? And I'm like, hey, John, this is great. Thank you. I'm not interested right now, but I really hope I respect your organization. I thank you for the time. And we moved on. So text might be
that's pretty bold though, when you're on the job search. I can see why the person would do it. But I do think that could be
but you're also being ghosted. That's pretty bold. You're ghosting me.
I
don't want to tell you how deep I'm going to go. You know what I mean?
I think one of the things that people could do to avoid this is once you've had the interview, it's totally fine. And even before that, to link in with the person who's interviewing you. So that you're kind of in their
social proof.
You're in their network. So that's a good idea. Julie made the comment, I would do smoke signals, but don't think they would see it. Ghost, pun intended.
Absolutely.
we have to face, like, as much as we're saying never get ghosted again, some people just, I think some people are like you said at the beginning, they're conflict averse too. They feel like it's going to cause a conflict and you're going to have, so any way that we could make our messages it clear in our messages that we're not going to give them a hard time if it's not the result that we want.
Okay.
Sending those signals will be
So
important to getting some response.
That's beautiful. That is because actually in sales, you can sending a message where you like I disqualified myself to a degree with drone delivery just to get an outcome, right? And and an email could sound like, hey, you know, we were scheduled to get back to me on Wednesday, and I didn't hear from you. It's been a week. Am I to understand then that this process is final? And actually I've got another bomb email, another bomb tactic after this, right? But you can actually put that in, and I did that in a sales process recently where I just said, hey, we were going to connect post, we didn't hear from you, or we understand that maybe this isn't something that is high priority for you. I'm happy to take your feedback. Even if it means we're on the back burner for now. And the customer said, no, we're absolutely interested. Let's get a meeting. You know what I mean? Like, it was like that giving them the psychological safety. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but there's a psychological safety you provide a person that makes them feel good and comfortable by maybe taking it off the table.
Okay, I'm going to jump out again, but Wayne was mentioning too that he has large customers, and sometimes, and you know what, first 30 is the same. Sometimes you have these customers and they, for whatever reason, ghost you and come back months later, like, you know, maybe it was just a wrong time for them. But you know, I think that we could apply so much of this to the sales process like you do, Mike, and also in our personal lives, right? Because it happens everywhere.
It does. I just and I think that the customer scenario is interesting, right? So my vibe on that was always, if I was chasing a large target customer, was always to be that it was like the next time I talked to him was like the first time I talked to him. So I always said, like, this is the first time we've talked, because if you ever put anything in with a customer about, oh, well, you know, you didn't get back to me, it's like, you're done. Nobody will put up with that. But if you maintain really positive, hey, it's like the first time I reached out, that's what I would do in those long-term sales processes. Just always have a really good energy, like it was the first time I'd ever asked them for an appointment, rather than the 30th time. You wouldn't have even known it from tone and inflection, because it was always like, this is the first time we talked. Now, the bomb that you can drop at the end. So step one was the frame. Step two was this tactic was going to work a lot of the time, right? And if you're still stuck and you need to get an outcome, right? This one I got from Chris Voss. So shout out to Chris Voss. Chris Voss, the master negotiator, worked with the FBI, did hostage negotiations, wrote the book, Negotiating as Your Life Depended on It. And I always take from this, the reason the book's called Never Split the Difference is because if Chris Voss entered into a hostage negotiation with some bad intent folks, and there were 20 hostages, he couldn't just say, all right, here's the deal. You keep 10 hostages and we'll take 10 hostages and we're going to call it even, right? There is no splitting the difference in a hostage situation. You need all. And one of the tactics that he developed, and he talks about, he's got a blog as well with great content. If you haven't read his book, I recommend it, is sending an email with the subject line, have you given up on this? No additional context. One email, one subject line, have you given up on this, right? So there's a lot of psychology in play here as well. People hate to be considered as quitters, and so it's a great strategy to elicit a no response in the mind of the hiring manager. And there's psychological safety in no, right? People feel free to share better and more candid information once they know you have the psychological freedom to say no. Because yeses are there's so much attached with yeses. Oh, I say yes. What did I commit to? How long will this take? What if it's the wrong person? But you can actually have a lot of success in your life, even, and in sales and in relationships and communications, by where you want to get a yes response, flip it around into a no response. You'll put the other person you're talking to at ease, and you'll get the same effect, right? So if I were to say, Amy, if I wanted to get an appointment with you to pitch you on IT services, right? And you were a bit resistant, I could say, Amy, would it be ridiculous for us to spend 15 minutes next Wednesday? which is a lot. And if you say no, that, no, that would be fine. That's the same thing as yes, but there's so much less pressure. So just finding ways to reword, things you want yeses into no. Would it be a dumb idea? Is it crazy if I suggested that we would, that kind of a thing? And in this instance too, right? It's like, have you given up on this? So in the mind of the person who reads the emails, well, no, I haven't given up on it. And that one got me to the other side as well, where I was being ghosted, and I sent the email. And in this case, it didn't work. Like, it wasn't like they hired me, but they said, yeah, you know what? We continued with the process and we went with other candidates, and that's completely fine. But it prevented me from being ghosted.
Oh, that's interesting. I think there's also, if anybody has a mastermind subscription, he may have, I know there is a negotiation course, and I think that it is him who runs that course. So we do have a question, Mike, here about,
yes.
And I have some feedback as well, but someone dealing with a client who hasn't paid, and it's been over 2 months ago that they sent the last invoice.
Right.
And I know this isn't job seeking, but
no, I like that.
like,
so I would honestly, my top of mind, my gut tells me, you could still use it. Have you given up on honoring your commitment to pay this invoice?
Yeah. The other, so I have a perspective, if it helps.
Yes.
One thing that I would say is, if you have what looks like a very sophisticated invoicing process, I do think that it makes your customers more likely to pay you and pay you on time. So for First 30, we use QuickBooks. It goes right to the person's email. It's like from the accounting team, right? So you don't have to spend a lot of money in the background to get these sophisticated looking processes. Because when you look sophisticated, a person's going to be, I think that companies are going to be more likely to respond in kind. Not to say, because sometimes when we're a small contractor, that can be difficult. I've been in this situation before. So my first notes were very, QuickBooks does cost. Yes, there is a cost. I think it's about $20 a month, but you can probably try it on a trial basis for 30 days or something. So you can look that up. But what I would say is that my emails are very warm, and then they go, and I make sure I follow up every few days, every week, following up, and I copy the trail of all the messages. So that person will know, or that organization will know. They might just be disorganized, right? But they will know that it is being tracked, that we have a record. I've even kept the string alive from when they committed to the costs. So I get that in writing in that way. So I hope that helps. But the more sophisticated your processes look, the more options you give them for payment, and the continual follow-up that feels like it's regular. And if you have somebody else who works with you, so I have people on my team and they can follow up on my behalf too, that does start to help as well.
I like those.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. AR are probably the people who get ghosted the most professionally. So that's a different seminar.
I think that's a whole different seminar, and maybe one day we'll run it.
Yep. Agreed. Because there's value. So the call to action. So everybody on this seminar, we are all going to agree that we are going to take ownership of our interview process. In this case, interview processes or sales processes or whatever processes where ghosting can occur. We are going to trust our emotions when we are sensing something is wrong or off track, because they're probably right. And we are going to leverage the power of go for no in keeping conversations alive and heading to a conclusion. Now, at this stage, I'm opening up for questions, and please feel free to share your own ghost stories, and anybody who named the character on the right there also will get extra credit in my mind. I will respect you more if you can name the character. That's what you'll get. I'll admire you more if you can tell me who that is.
Well, is it the character or the
I'll take either.
Actor?
The character or the actor.
Oh.
I don't have
I'm not going to answer. Well, I feel like the answer is obvious in who the character is, but then maybe there's another character.
No.
Somebody answered Count Floyd.
Count Floyd. Ooh,
good one. That was
scary.
Wayne.
Count Floyd. Scary stuff, kids.
So someone mentioned in the comments, and I feel the same way. about ghosting is that I felt like I have ghosted people in the past, and I wanted to share that because I wanted to share why. Um, and I know that from my perspective, especially as, and we're all, and you said it before, and I actually write about being busy in the book and saying you're busy. But in a case where you're running a startup business and you're doing all these things, it can be very hard and overwhelming to try to get back to every single person that reaches out to you, even if you do have an established relationship. So one thing is you're not always being ghosted, because sometimes, like, someone sent me an email today, they had sent me a LinkedIn message. And sometimes my LinkedIn, because I use that for my business, it gets overwhelmed because LinkedIn is not easy to organize. And I think we should remember that about LinkedIn, that don't be worried about reaching out again, because people's LinkedIn messages do get buried. So that's important. So that's one reason that I unintentionally ghost people. The other is when there's a massive over ask. And it's like, can we get on a call to talk about my career? I'm at a crossroads and I've got these messages. I get a number of them every week, Mike. That's something. So all I wanted to say is we should remember, like, and I'm sure I'm not necessarily saying it's the people on this call and that's why you're getting ghosted, because it, it very well may not be the case. But one of the things that I have, and I've done it to people before, the over ask, by the way, so I've made this mistake myself, but we need to remember where that person is in I talk about tiers of relationships. Are they close friend and family? Well, then yes, you can ask them for 30 minutes or an hour of their time to talk about your career, because they'll be invested. But as we go out to the point where we're with acquaintances and strangers, that asks become a lot, and we also have to be willing to give. So it's like a give, get scenario. So how do I help this person first, even if it's by liking their content or engaging with them somehow? You are so good at that, Mike.
And you know what? I learned that. So a couple of things. So I want to share. Thank you for being there, because I actually think we have to leave room for our friends to ghost us once in a while. Like, you have to have such a good friendship that you're allowed to ghost. So I had a situation, and what I found on my job search was too, you're also in a different time in job search. When you're in your job search, everything's immediate, and your friends who are all working, everything's delayed, right? So I was actually reaching out for people to ask them for time on the phone, and I got no response, but then they would engage on my content. You know what I mean? There's like, they will meet you where you want to be met. So you got to leave room in your heart. You know what I mean? That's a lot of the people in your lives that you know, and that if you have asked and if you feel like it, you got to leave room in your heart for them to ghost you, once, you know what I mean? And that they actually will. I thought, oh my God, they're actually supporting me in other ways, right? And then when they're ready, you know what I mean? Maybe it's time for that conversation, right? So leave room in your heart for your friends to ghost you once in a while. That's the sign of your friendships. Friends can ghost each other. Things are going on, and maybe their headspace. And what you said about your, people over asking. So you have a lot of value. That's why they're coming to you. I think it's, if we want time, we've got to establish what our value is, right? We really need to say, like, if I'm going to send in a LinkedIn request and I'm asking you to join my network, what's my value to the other person? What's my value as the job seeker? If I'm always thinking about that, knowing that I have value and I represent that value well, I'm also diminishing the chance of ghosted, because maybe you on the other side is like, hey, maybe Mike can bring me some insight on sales tactics if I take this 30 minutes with him, and he says, hey, Amy, I want to talk to you about where I'm at a career crossroads. Also, I was really interested in your article that you wrote around onboarding, and I that was my favorite part of my job with Granger, and I would love to get your perspective there as well. That's potentially indicating value. You might be more willing to take that call.
A little flattery goes a long way, especially with
flattery's value. Flattery's value. That's why they say, you put in that thing. Like that's a value, right? The mentor, the kid that gets to university that wants to get a mentor with a senior executive will say, I would love to learn about your experiences and your stories, right? That's value.
So we have a question here. I'm going to read it. It's anonymous. So I got hired for a freelance contract for 20 hours for 3 months, worked for 3 weeks, and they put the job on hold because they were applying for a COVID subsidy through Employment Ontario. I was supposed to start 2 weeks ago, and my boss said he would check with the employment counselor and get back to me. It's been 2 weeks since I heard from him. Any advice? And here's the important caveat, right? Not that we should always, but he is very well connected, so they want to keep a good relationship.
Yeah, I think that something has gone wrong, and your emotions are right. So something has gone wrong. So I feel as though that is where we, that's that stage 2 in email, right? Is, maybe a recap. Here's where we were. Here's where we agreed to be. And, something's off track. Can you update me on the next steps? Something's gone wrong here.
And you could maybe even put that in the title. Has something gone wrong?
So I use that one as well to close the process, right? So I said, hey, it's been, we talked on Wednesday, but that's 2 weeks ago. So that indicates to me that something's gone wrong in this process, right? So, and the guy said, yeah, you know what? We ended up interviewing other people, right? And that's okay, because that's my outcome. But, and that also opens up, it softens it too, because maybe something has gone wrong. Maybe somebody quit, or you know what I mean? You're not saying, hey, you ghosted me. You're saying, has something gone wrong? Are there other external factors?
Yeah, and that's such a good idea, because we don't know what's gone wrong. Someone could be unwell, something could have happened. Yeah. So I'm really sorry that happened to whoever it happened to, because that feels very wrong to me. Yeah. Whether, and I know that you want to maintain that positive relationship with someone who's very well connected. And I guess it's like shame on them.
Add me on LinkedIn. I'm very well connected. Right. So if you need to ghost them, you can replace their network with my network.
Okay, good. I hope that answers the question. So why, there's a couple more questions here. Why would an initial contractor become ghosted? I'm not sure I understand this. Initial connected about the job, then no. So I guess the question is, why would this happen? So I think we covered that. Why would it happen? Maybe something has probably gone wrong. That person might be distracted. And one thing we have to think about when we're on the job search and we're contracting is those contracts and those jobs are much more important and valuable to us than it may be for that employer to be filling the role. So our priorities do not align with their priorities, sadly. That's one thing we have to keep in mind. So there's another question. Is there a difference in level of ghosted by hierarchy? When looking for laborers compared to higher management, the amount of resumes differ. And if you cannot get back to each and every resume received, is that considered ghosting?
Nope. I don't think not getting an answer to a resume is ghosting at all, right? One thing that I learned in job search mode that I carried with me, and sometimes I think even people find it counterintuitive, right? But they would say, oh, I went through this process and I didn't get the job, and they told me I didn't get the job, but they didn't give me any feedback. I wanted feedback. And I actually think feedback in a job interview process is not as valuable as people think it is, because all hiring decisions are made on the basis of emotions and then validated with logic. So the feedback they give you might be completely take you in a direction you don't even need to go in, right? So you interview, you don't get hired. They interview somebody else that they just felt better about. Maybe they went to the college, whatever, halo effect, or they had pitchfork effect with you because you're from Shelbyville and they're from Springfield and they don't hire you. Well, they're not going to tell you that because they don't even know in their minds. They're going to say stuff like, oh, well, thanks for the interview. We appreciate you, but you didn't have enough industry experience, right? But at the same time, people get hired all the time from outside the industry, right? So there's the validity of the feedback might not even be great. What you own as a job seeker, you need to compel the person you're talking to hire you. And when they hire you, you did your job. You compelled them to hire you. And when they don't hire you, you didn't compel them to hire you. That's the reason you didn't get the job. They weren't compelled to hire you, right? And and you own that. And it's okay, because I'm not going to compel everybody. I'm not going to win them all, right? But I need to own the outcome. You know what I mean? Like, own the result. My job. I must compel them. And if I don't get hired, I didn't compel them.
Yeah, or, you didn't compel them, or they did go a different direction that may have had, you couldn't compete with for whatever reason.
But I didn't compel them. You know what I mean? Like, right. Oh my God, I have to hire Mike Fried. Cancel everything. You know what I mean? Like, they're compelled, right?
And I would say that the one thing as an employee, like if anyone is being an employer on the call is looking for advice, one of the ways to better the experience of the person applying is to not ask for a cover letter. Rather, maybe have a small test in the interview, or give them 3 questions they can answer in writing before they come in for their interview. Something like that, when you're serious about that candidate, rather than making the cover letter the initial part of the process. Because I just think of, especially now when there's so much job searching going on, all the wasted hours people are investing. Cover letters can be so difficult for candidates to write. And I know this because I work with candidates all the time. So that is one thing that I would say to employers, to ease the burden on the candidate. If you can't get back to everyone anyway, eliminate that part and then ask 3 questions or something to the people who you are serious about speaking with. So if there's any more questions, please feel free to type them in furiously. If not, Mike, such a great session. I learned so much. Thank you very, very much. I hope that no one in this call ever gets ghosted again and they have an edge up over everyone else out there now. I've always enjoyed connecting with you. You are not someone I could ever imagine ghosting, so I don't know how anyone could dare do that to someone as wonderful as you. And I often will put up that Jerry Seinfeld slide, where his mother says to him, how could anyone not like you? So you are on LinkedIn. So if you are not connected with Mike, look him up. If you're having trouble finding him, you can reach out to me. You are welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. I know some of the people on this call are in the First 30 program. So if there's anything you want to follow up and discuss with me, by all means, we can do that. But thank you, Mike. Such a pleasure to see you and to run this session. And thanks to everyone so much for coming.
Feel free to add me on LinkedIn. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Look forward to connecting.
And don't leave, Mike. I need you.
Okay.